Hi, this is Representative Davenport from the New Hampshire House. I represent the people of the towns of Newmarket and Newfields. In the following video, I use a model to show the three branches of government and how they are constructed. In follow-up videos, I add details to the model and use it to explain the purpose of three pieces of legislation I would like you to consider. The follow-up videos will be released shortly. Thank you for your time. In this video, we review the legislative branch, review the executive branch, see both in action as a state, glance at our republic, and finally review the judiciary. A disk to represent the domain of the state. We add a smaller disk to represent the lower chamber of the legislature, the People's House. In most states and at the federal level, every 2 years we elect someone to represent us. So if the blue disk represents a town, the people of the town elect a representative to their state house every 2 years. The Senate is constructed the same way, the primary difference being the number of people the senator represents. In New Hampshire, both the legislative and executive branches are elected on 2-year cycles, including the Senate. At the federal level, your senator would rise, sit there for 6 years. You'd have a couple election cycles for your lower house before he was reelected. Let's review these tensors, kind of like a rubber band. If you added a term limit for legislators, it would shorten the tensor. The most important things affecting the tensor's length are population represented, mode of election, and mode of taxation. If the blue discs represent towns or population centers, then the larger the population center, the longer the tensor, and the more freedom the elected official has. Looking at the House and Senate together, we can see that the senator represents more people and is more removed from their direct influence. Thus the saying that the House picks up the passion of the people and legislation moves to the Senate to cool. With 400 members, New Hampshire is one of the largest houses in the world. Combined with the small population, the House is extraordinarily close to the people. There is one representative in New Hampshire in the New Hampshire House for every 3,300 people. California, by contrast, has one representative for every 420,000 people. So that's your legislature. Let's check out the executive. Before the American Revolution, our chief executive was a king, His Highness King George. His decisions were our laws. Whatever he wanted, he took, and protestations from us made no difference. He was entitled to his position by birth, and he not only defended his sphere of influence, but sought to increase it through war. Living under His Majesty's watch, the people of the colonies learned some lessons about what they did and did not want in a chief executive. First, his power would not be hereditary. Like the legislative branch, he would be elected and accountable to the people. It's a horse race, but the Purple Party pulls it out. Purple has been in power too long. The people go for yellow. Second, his more extreme powers were limited to times of emergency or war. During these times, he had the ability to defend the state of New Hampshire within certain constraints, for example, by calling up the militia. Third, during normal times, his reach was restricted to its proper place. For example, from here he could run the state police and enforce state laws passed by the legislature, but local police matters would be left to governments controlled locally. One thing to note here, a significant part of the money used to run the local government comes from property taxes collected from property within the blue discs, towns. Because the money to run the town comes from local sources, the local government must pay attention to the taxpayer. Additionally, at this local level, people know their neighbors and form tight-knit communities and social networks. For example, my children attend the local school, and I'm friends with other parents in town. On the other hand, larger businesses, state parks, and state highways are sources of revenue for the state government, the entity that is in charge of maintaining or policing them. But if the state can successfully grab this local tax revenue, or a significant part of it, it can loosen its chains and rise above the people. Since the state has a different set of responsibilities than local governments, a large portion of this added revenue is likely to be diverted from its previous use. Additionally, even though much of the money is not returned to the local entity, mandates are imposed on how the returned revenue is spent. The net effect is both the local and state governments become less responsive to the people they represent. If you think of the central orange area as all the people coming together into the state to solve large central problems, you can also think of all of the people coming together into the towns, the green areas, to solve local problems. In a properly designed constitution, these entities may oscillate in power, but neither comes to dominate the other. You can also see the red ball as the adjuster of the power ratio between the local and central. Here we have the U.S. Republic in its original configuration, with only 2 states showing for clarity and some other parts also hidden. You can see the President, 2 governors, the Senate in red, the Federal House in yellow, and 2 state houses. Connecting the state houses to the Senate is the Senate tensor. Where the senator appears along the Senate tensor adjusts the power balance between the central government and the states. In total, there are far more representatives in the state houses than in the federal house. So the state houses are closer to the people and better at dealing with local issues, or more local issues. The federal house is better at dealing with national issues, such as the war machine. When we view more states, we see a problem. There is a huge overlap of their domains. To solve this problem, the U.S. Constitution grants a small number of strong powers to the central government, with all other powers left to the states. For example, the Commerce Clause grants to the federal government the ability to regulate trade between states. In the original configuration, power would oscillate between the states and the federal government like this. In the early 1900s, a plan was created to turn off this normal oscillation and centralize power into Washington. The Constitution granted the power to elect senators to the state legislatures, but there was a way around it. Some states would hold a popular vote, and then the legislature would elect the vote winner. This effectively moved the attachment point for the Senate tensor down towards the base. After enough senators were elected in this manner, they passed the 17th Amendment, locking in this method of election. The 16th Amendment, creating the federal income tax, and the Federal Reserve Act, creating a central bank, were passed in the same year. The net effect has been to crank power into Washington and into ever larger big business structures connected to it. The judiciary. I've drawn the court high here above the executive for demonstration purposes. We will be moving it in a moment. In designing a constitution, there are many reasons to separate powers among different branches of government. You don't want those that write the laws preferentially enforcing the laws, so you separate the legislative and the executive. An important trait for a court is to be buffered from partisan faction. In the most common case, you buffer the court by granting a longer term of office. As members retire and are replaced, in this case by the executive, the court slowly oscillates around the center. This is generally considered sufficient to buffer the court from partisan influence. However, you still need to keep a balance between your 3 branches of government. This is commonly done by having the executive branch appoint the court member and the Senate approve the appointment. This has the effect of pulling the court to a position between the executive and legislative branches. I hope this presentation was informative. The follow-up videos addressing the specific legislation will be released shortly.